Authenticity is one of my core personal values. One of the things that I've been living since before I started phrasing the things about my life in the context of my values and my practices. There's a cartoon that was really popular in the 90s. It's called Daria. How many of us are familiar with Daria? Okay, yeah, Gen X, millennials, show out. Wonderful. So Daria is fundamentally a cartoon about a really disaffected suburban teenager in the 1990s. She is sarcastic to actually a fault. She does not believe in people, and the whole ethos of her world is that if you're being authentic, you're probably about to get bullied. But at one point, she and her best friend, Jane, sit in a movie theater next to each other, and the statement is, I don't want to pick a career as a teenager, so I don't wake up at 40 years old not sure whose life I'm living. That caught me early on. There was pressure in my life to pick a career, to decide who I was going to be when I was quite young. In fact, when I was 3 years old, my parents bought me a little play doctor kit and told me that I wanted to be a doctor, a thing I believed until I was 17 years old. I got to college and I started taking pre-med classes, and the classes were one thing, but in a specific course I took, we had to go interview someone who had the job we thought we wanted. I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician or a pediatric psychiatrist. So I went and I talked to a couple people with those jobs. Not the jobs I actually wanted. The pediatrician spent too much time not seeing patients, and the psychiatrist seemed so sad. And I was already pretty sad myself, so I thought, maybe not. I was wrong about which things I didn't want in those careers, though. My first move was to switch from being a pre-med major to being a biochemistry major. That didn't last very long. As it turns out, part of my authentic experience of the universe is that if somebody says you imagine that molecule and you just pick it up in your head and turn it around, I very much do not. However, I could write an essay with very little issue. The point isn't my career trajectory. The point is that listening to myself told me something about where I needed to go next. It was just a little bit of information. It wasn't like a clear, blinding light that said, nope, this direction. It was just a little flickery red light that said, nope, not there. I learned that from my grandmother that my parents had told me I wanted to be a doctor because their goal was to have a child who was a kind of professional that had a different sort of class status than them as factory managers. A doctor, a lawyer, I guess a clergy person worked. We did okay. Some of the point of telling you that story is to mention that authenticity is a moving target. That my authentic self at 17 and my authentic self at 36 are pretty different people. That I expect my authentic self at 46 will be yet another person, and that at 56 and 66 and 76, and should I get there, 86, those will all be different but still true versions of myself. There's a tendency to think of authenticity or of coming out as telling the absolute truth about yourself. That you must know, with a capital K, who you are and which words are yours, and be right about it the first time. We wind up in some complicated situations when we expect people to tell us who they are and then never change. In the context of what language I use about myself, that has moved around, as much as more than my career trajectory. I realized that I was queer when I was about 14 years old, when somebody said the word bisexual to me for the first time. I was in my best friend's kitchen, and she was making posters to hang on her classmates' lockers, and she said, "This one's for Barbara Joy. She's bisexual." And I said, "You could be that?" Hold on, what? I had simply never heard the word before, and when I did, I knew it applied to me. And for a while, that was it. That was the word. I was bisexual. And then I learned the word pansexual, and I thought, maybe that? Then eventually I kind of gave up on words altogether, started just calling myself queer and figuring if you cared, you could figure it out. And if it mattered, well, you knew. And then new questions, right? I settled in to an identity for my sexuality, and then, oh no, I thought myself clean out of gender. Started thinking about what does it mean to be a woman, and I realized that more and more for me, it didn't mean anything at all. That there was no relationship between my physical body and that word that meant that they had to go together, and that I actually liked it better when they didn't. So authenticity is a moving target. The labels you put on yourself are a moving target. You don't have to find the perfect words. I'll give you another example from my life. How I identify religiously or theologically has moved around quite a lot in the course of my life. Around the same time that I realized that I was bisexual, I also realized that, unlike most of my classmates, I didn't really believe in God. I grew up in a world where there were 17 churches in my town of 8,000 people. What did we need all of those for? 16 Protestant churches, 1 Catholic church, nothing else. Most of my friends and relatives who were religious, which was most of them, were evangelicals. They had really strong and clear beliefs about who and what God was, and I didn't particularly share those. I tried really, really hard. It is very difficult to be told from all angles that there is capital T truth that you could have access to if you would just stop asking so many damn questions. I got coercively saved at a Pentecostal church one night at a youth lock-in, which was just supposed to be a fun thing I went to with my friends. But instead, while I was locked in the building in the middle of the night, a youth minister who may or may not have any credentials gave a fire and brimstone sermon to a bunch of young teenagers, in which he said repeatedly, "If you died tonight, would you ever see your parents again?" I did not know, but he promised me that if I repeated some words that he said, then I could know. I was 14, was not emotionally able to handle this, so I went up to the front of the sanctuary and I repeated the words back to him, and I felt better, but mostly because he wasn't yelling at me anymore. And as the service closed and I walked away with my friends, I'm like, okay, well, this is me now. I believe in Jesus now. I'm trying to convince myself of this. When my friend says, "Oh, I just can't wait until you start speaking in tongues." And that was too far for me. I called my father and I went home. Spent a lot of time trying to find the words after that for what I actually was. I called myself an agnostic theist for a time because of the Pascal's wager of it all, right? If I just say that maybe I believe, then maybe God will be happy enough with that and I'll be okay. It didn't feel particularly true, though. What felt most true was that people needed to be able to know each other. That whatever we believed about how the universe functions whether there was or wasn't a God, there sure were other people. That we could be in community with each other and treat each other well, build something better than the world we were given, without needing the threat of punishment at the end or the promise of perfection. That we could build something new and different without needing to think that there was something perfect in the past that we should get back to. Eventually, I actually came to find that backward looking, a perfect thing before that we need to get back to be really dangerous. To allow people to fantasize about history in ways that do not reflect what most people's experience of history was. This too is authenticity, actually, right? Being honest with yourself about what you believe and about the effects of what you believe. I think that we are responsible for the things we choose to believe and the way we choose to behave out of that belief. Authenticity needs balanced by other values and rounded out in the context of community. You cannot be an asshole to people just because it feels authentic to you to behave like an asshole. Or, you can, but I don't value that. Some of us are naturally, authentically, a little abrasive, a little intense. I am naturally a little intense. You pointed at someone who deserves it, not just everybody around you. You take the anger and irritation that you feel, which are real, actual feelings that you get to honor. And you find something to do with it that moves the world the direction you want, rather than just pushing your feelings out of you and into whoever is around to absorb them. Your authentic self and your unhealed self are not the same person. There was a quote in Karen's centering reflection about who you were before you were hurt. I like that idea, but I'm not sure that who you were before is who matters. I think who matters is who you're going to be. Who you choose to be right now, how you choose to be on a path that is about healing that stuff that made you reactive, right? About finding a way to be centered enough in yourself that you make choices on purpose, that you behave because you mean to. As often as possible, nobody can actually do it all the time, right? You will make a mistake. You will yell at someone you love because there are just slightly too many noises in the room, and you are a little overstimulated. You will fail to show up because you are too tired, because the world hurts you all the time. That's okay. Your authentic self is the one that gets back up. Your authentic self is not the one that, your authentic self makes the mistake, but your authentic self and your more favorite self, your next self, your more healed self, is the one that gets back up. That figures out how to say that you're sorry. That figures out how to get back in the conversation when you had to move away to protect yourself. I think about authenticity in the context of ethical culture as very closely linked with the idea of eliciting the best. We talk about eliciting the best in each other and thereby ourselves, or in ourselves and thereby each other. And these are both directions in which we can increase each other and our own in authenticity. But how? How do we encourage and support the authentic in one another? We make it easy to express individuality. We don't have a dress code, right? You You are not required to come here in any particular style of dress, and you get to enjoy aesthetically whatever it is that you enjoy. I like to look like this. I do not like to wear khaki-colored pants or chinos. John Dakin likes to wear chinos, and that is John Dakin's authentic self, and thus wonderful. You don't have to be the same to see that when you get to present yourself as you like, then you get to show up for real. We get to see how amazing it is that there are 50 people in this room, and each of you is different from the one next to you, even if you are on the surface very alike. We can understand each person as the authority on their own experience. Nobody but you has been living your life. Nobody but you knows what it's like on the inside. You are the ultimate authority on your experience of the world. And nobody else is. Nobody else is the authority over you, and you are the authority over nobody else. You can believe people when they tell you how they feel, when they say what their gender is, what their sexuality is, when they tell you what kind of accommodations their disability that you maybe cannot see requires, when they tell you what their physical body can and can't do, when they tell you what hurts their feelings, even if maybe it wouldn't hurt yours. We can approach differences with curiosity, but not spectacle. The difference between curiosity and spectacle can be fine, because curiosity might come out with a little bit too much enthusiasm, as, wow, how do you do that? It's not always the most welcoming or affirming way to interact with a person. Nobody, no matter how spectacular or loudly dressed they often are, actually likes to be treated like a novelty at all times. But curiosity can say, oh, I really love those earrings. Can you tell me about them? Or, you shared such an interesting poem today. Can you tell me about that? Or, I really love how I can hear you laugh during platform. I'd like to get to know you better, right? You can approach each other's presentation and presence with curiosity. You can say, even though I wouldn't start here, it's interesting to me that you describe your gender this way when I see this thing. Wait until you know someone to ask that question. Do not begin your conversations that way. But if you have known a trans person for some amount of time and you want to know how they think about their gender, it's a reasonable question to ask someone you have a relationship with. Unlock this again. We can also learn to give and receive meaningful feedback. That is not hard criticism. As it happens, very few people you will encounter in your day-to-day need your brutal honesty. We are all present to plenty of brutality. Let's not add it to each other's lives. However, it is useful to be able to say, I feel blank when blank. So for example, I am habitually late. I have really bad ADHD and I only understand how to be extremely on time or 5-10 minutes behind. This leads to me being a kind of complicated person to do collaborative work with. I know. And so, I have been able to accept feedback in which people say, hey, it is hard for me to do my tasks when you do not do your tasks. I can actually cause my brain to understand time when it means helping other people have an easier time. I'm not perfect at it, but I try. For example, I have turned in all of my board reports on time this program year, which is a big deal for me. You can learn to say to people, hey, ow, that thing you said hurt. You can learn to receive someone saying, hey, ow, that thing you said hurt. And you can receive that with curiosity, with care, rather than with defensiveness. You can say to yourself, sometimes is necessary, it's okay that I'm not perfect. It's okay that I messed up. This person cares enough about our relationship to want to invite me back into it. Somebody offering you a correction is somebody who is offering you the opportunity to stay in relationship. We can also encourage creative expression in children and in adults. We're doing a pretty good job of that here. But we can focus some of our work in Seek on developing the creative capacity of our children. And we can spend time together really taking seriously art in all of its forms, right? Art that is physical and visual, art that is sonic, art that is presentational, art that is something you keep on the ends of your fingers because it helps you get through the day. We can take seriously creativity. And the more we take creativity seriously, the more each of us has language in which to express ourselves. Sometimes the things that are truest about yourself don't come to you in words first. Sometimes they appear in colors and shapes or sounds. If you speak saxophone, for example, you might be able to communicate things about yourself, about what it feels like to be you, better in saxophone than you can in English. I can express the truth about my gender in splashes of paint better than I can in words. I'm going to guess that each of you has something that you can express better in your creativity, whether it's creativity that is still English language, that is poem or academic essay. I think those are creative too. That counts for me. Whether it is in paint or collage or song, it doesn't even have to be something you came up with. There might be something you sing that resonates inside of you in a way that says, this is true for me. And the more we can speak in these languages, the more we can hear each other in these different languages, the more we can know each other and be present with the fullness of one another's personhood. I'm going to speed up a little bit because it's too cold for me to talk for that long. We can work against high control hierarchical systems. In a time of rising authoritarianism and fascism, there is something so truly, deeply subversive about saying, you know what? I'm going to choose to be myself and see other people as whole people as often as possible. These high control hierarchical systems, they tell us that there's a right way to be, right? Up here at the top of the pyramid is the person who is correct, right? Or the type of person who is correct. And that the further down you go, the less correct a person is. Or that there is a center to the circle, which is the correct way to be a man, a woman, nothing else. that is the correct way to be an elder or a young person, the correct way to be a parent, and that there is only one way to do it. And that is a lie. It's a really compelling lie because the problem with authenticity is that it requires vulnerability. It is really easy and safe feeling if somebody says, this is who to be, and you can say, okay. It feels much less safe to step out into the space of who you actually are. So some of what we can do is work against those systems in ourselves, in our community, and in our world. We can listen to one another. We can encounter and collaborate with one another as equals. I've talked before about the way that jazz influences my thinking, the way that jazz, through hip-hop actually, influences my thinking. In part, that it is hard to collaborate with someone if you don't see them as an equal. It is difficult to really jam with someone if you can't enjoy their rhythms too. When we encounter and collaborate with one another as equals, we come up with something that is bigger and weirder and cooler than what any of us could do on our own. And we get the opportunity not only to hear each other, but to hear each other enmeshed, right? Crossing in and out of one another, making that new thing. We can work to that in ourselves by spending time with ourselves, by making sure that there are quiet moments where you can hear yourself think. That's hard sometimes. Sometimes I don't want to hear what I have to think. Sometimes I want to dump other people's sounds into my brain constantly so I don't have to think about what's going on in here. But you gotta. It is unfortunate, but it is true. And in fact, it is actually quite fortunate that you have the ability to sit with yourself and hear and feel and digest what it means to be you. In those spaces, we can seek to understand and make peace with our emotions, our feelings, which are a type of fact, not the only facts available, but a type, an important type, which tell us when something is wrong or when something is right. Right? We can take our experiences of feeling angry and say, I might not enjoy feeling angry. I don't actually particularly enjoy feeling angry, though I do feel angry a lot. And say, that is a sign that something is wrong. That is my emotional self saying, alert, 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 bad. If you digest the anger just a little bit, let it stop being the loudest thing in your head. Sometimes you can take that anger, you can take that energy, and you can push it around and turn it into something that helps remedy that system, right? You can take your anger and turn it into power. It's fire. It works all kinds of ways. It can burn down your village, yes, but it can also run an engine. We can try things that we don't expect to be good at. That one's really hard. I have a really hard time, historically, doing things that I'm not immediately kind of great at. I am the sort of person who is naturally pretty good at a whole bunch of stuff, and it has been really easy in my life to just focus on the things that I'm already good at. But there is something really freeing in sitting down to do something that you expect to fail at, where there are no consequences. One of my favorite things to do is buy art supplies that I don't know how to use, and then take on no instructions about how to use them. And simply do what I do and probably do it like horribly wrong the first time. It is so freeing to do art without expecting it to be good, without it being for anyone else, without it having a point other than, I'm gonna play with this. There's no real risk of failure. Usually I have spent at most $8. Finding things you can try where there is very little risk of what happens when you fail, things you don't expect to be good at, but it won't really matter if you're not. It tells you a lot about yourself. It helps heal some of that perfectionism that we all internalize, because if it was fine that you messed up at this, then it might actually be okay if you messed up at something a little more important. You might actually have better internal responses to finding out that you messed up on something you care about, if you have been practicing what it's like to mess up on something with no consequences. And the last way that I want to suggest that we can meet the authentic in ourselves is by exploring our aesthetic possibilities. Buy a piece of clothing that you think is a little outside of the range of what you would usually wear. Maybe buy like a necklace or a button that's a little more bold than you usually go. See what it's like to just pick up things that you like and not worry about if it's the right thing or what other people will like. I'm not suggesting that you will all arrive at like brightly colored personal aesthetics. Please don't. I'm saying that there's not actually rules, right? Now, your office might have some rules, that's a different situation, but the world doesn't actually have a lot of rules about what you're allowed to wear. Put on a skirt if that seems like it might be interesting. Or like, don't if it really feels like it wouldn't be. Let yourself present in ways that feel good to you. Worry first about if it feels like you. Sometimes you is a person who wears all black at all times, and that is a wonderful somebody to be. And sometimes you loves khaki pants and a button-up. Sometimes you wears a lot of polos. And you, across the course of your life, will dress a bunch of different ways. You will like a bunch of different styles of art and a bunch of different styles of music, but just because you didn't like something before or don't know if you would like something doesn't mean that you can't try it. Pick up an album in a genre of music you don't think you like. Ask a friend who has different taste in music than you to recommend something outside of your usual purview. Go to a museum that has the kind of art you don't think you like in it. For me, that requires me to go somewhere where there is photorealistic representational art. Do not like that. And yet, I recently went to the portrait gallery and found myself pretty enamored of the artistry and the work and the creativity that is bringing someone's person to life in a portrait. Stretch yourself a little bit. And come back next week. So we're going to talk about art more next week. And I have some ideas of things you might want to see. So much of our potential as individuals and as a movement is in our ability to say to people, who you are is good. To let people come in and change us. We have the opportunity, though the cost of the opportunity I am not certain I would have taken on in other circumstances. We have the opportunity to do something that makes people more alive. Authoritarianism and fascism kill people, but first by killing their spirits. First by killing their sense of self, their sense of belonging, We have the ability to answer that with aliveness, with yes, with belief, deep, sincere, strongly held, ethical belief that each person's authenticity matters, and that when we bring who we are for real together, the sum of that whole is so, so much bigger than its parts. Thank you for braving the cold to be here with us today.